This episode is a little different from usual. We don't have a guest for the first segment today. We've rescheduled them to later this month, so we're going to go over some lessons learned from some recent breaches instead. Then Tyler Shields will join me for the Enterprise Security News, where we'll discuss some healthy early-stage funding worth talking about, no notable acquisitions despite all the crazy rumors out there, IronNet stops, Syncly starts. When it comes to email security, the vendor you choose apparently matters. SOC 2 demystified. It's marketing. It's all marketing. Software supply chain market analysis. AI LLMs are suckers for a sob story. That's a good one. Sneaker PCs. Dieselgate comes to continuous integration. For our final segment, we have pre-recorded executive interviews from InfoSec World with Viavi Solutions and Ridge IT Cyber. I believe there was one more. I'm missing one. And delete me. That's right. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Cyber threats target digital identities. Do you know who or what is accessing your company's apps, systems, and data? You need to know who's there, who to let in, and who to keep out. And you'll need more than access management to stay secure. You need SailPoint Identity Security. As the leader in identity security, SailPoint can help mature your security resilience while driving efficiencies and compliance for your organization. Start your identity journey with SailPoint's free maturity assessment. Go to securityweekly.com/SailPoint to get your free identity security assessment today. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phish credentials are useless to attackers, and you can manage every OS, even Linux, from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for IT. The good news is, you don't have to imagine this world. You can just start using Collide. Visit securityweekly.com/Collide to watch a demo today. That's securityweekly.com/KOLIDE. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly and happy National Rhode Island Day. This is episode 334, recorded on Thursday, October 5th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Admiral of AppSec, the King of Kubernetes, John Kinsella. How are you doing, John?
Happy Rhode Island Day. I didn't know that was a thing, but there you go.
I'm wondering how many of our folks in the studio, which is located in Rhode Island, knew it was Rhode Island Day today. Did we get a count?
I'm guessing not very many, but I don't know if it's their state.
Gus, did you guys know?
Gus says no.
Nope. Yeah, maybe there's a Tennessee day. Do all 50 states have a special day? I don't know, but October 5th is Rhode Island Day for whatever reason. Also, both me and John are F1 fans, so John came wearing his Aston Martin jersey there, so I had to throw on my Red Bull. Jersey's the wrong. What's the correct word here, John?
I guess they're jerseys. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think most of the times I've been on ESW, I've had one of my jerseys on. I've got like a collection of them, so I knew it was coming on. I had to throw this on, and it's my newest one.
Yours is a polo. I like yours. Mine is just.
I like the collars. I would never actually wear them to like work, but yeah, I don't know. The material feels nicer than the t-shirts to me.
Yeah, these, because all the logos and stuff get scratchy on the inside. I have to wear a shirt under it, so I'm a bit warm at the moment. Still very much summer here in Tennessee. All right, quick announcement, and then we'll dive into it. Security Weekly listeners, we are celebrating the milestone of reaching over 1,000 members of our CISO community. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Forum is a one-stop shop for executive collaboration comprised of CISOs across various industries. If you want to be part of this growing community of CISOs, join us as a member or a technology partner. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity collaboration. All one word. Put that all together. Cybersecurity collaboration. All right. Today. Yeah. Did you say that is your password?
I think it's one of my passwords, yeah.
Is one of your passwords? But with some substitutions in there at least, right?
Obviously, yes. Leet speak.
Yeah, leet speak. Today, we're talking about breaches. And I don't know, how closely do you follow breaches, John? Is that something where only if it's big, or do you go out of your way to read about them and how they happen and stuff like that?
One of the reasons I like being on talking about this is I always forget about the Defenders Initiative and like sort of the list of them that y'all keep. We cover them on Application Security Weekly, but we're usually trying to look at them more from a we focus there in either application security or cloud, right? Sort of DevSecOps. So if there's something I can like take away as a learning of like, hey, here's how we shouldn't. Here's what, I'm trying not to just point fingers and say, this is bad. It's like, to me, I talk about breaches. It's like, okay, was there an AppSec thing? Like, were they not encrypting? Were they? Let's think through some ones we have today. Was their logging not good enough? Were they, not patching their systems? Is there some sort of application security takeaway that our listeners can sort of think about? That's the way I like to think about them. So if I can meditate on it somehow, otherwise, there's too many of them, right? Like, so the big ones we get in the news, right. Like what MoveIt's going on. Yeah, I don't even keep track of it.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff that's just, somebody got a phishing email, BEC type stuff where they convinced a school system somewhere. Like I saw this one yesterday. I think it was the county in Florida where Destin is, and they convinced somebody to send $700,000 that was supposed to be earmarked for expanding schools, like actually, construction company build out some of the school system, build some more wings or more buildings on campus. Those kind, like there's not a whole lot to learn from those. The BEC is pretty straightforward. You need to have, really solid procedures when bank accounts change and money moves from place to place. Otherwise, it's literally as simple as a phone call or a text message or an email to get somebody to send a lot of money to the wrong place. So
I think really the learning on those is, it's more we need more staffing for those people or more education. It's sort of, you can either see on the webcam or feel the cringe in my voice. It's like it's something we know how to fix those. It's just like we need to somehow get those people more empowered or get them more resources. So yeah, it's super unfortunate, but it's, at least from my point of view, it's just another one.
Yeah. So those are so common. We're not going to cover any of that. These are just breaches where, for the most part, specifically, we've got enough details that we can learn something from it. And this is an unfortunate trend in the industry where most breach details are still kept quiet. Legally, I don't think anybody's really obligated to share like the entire investigation report or the Mandiant report or, all the technical details. But we do see some cases where that happens. Sometimes it's a class action lawsuit where it becomes discoverable and it's a public suit, so it becomes ends up in the public domain on the court website. Or like in the case of Equifax, if the breach is big enough, impacts enough people in our country or in another country, the government does an investigation and we get to see that report, which that's one of the reasons we're not going to talk about MGM today, is because it does look like, part of CISA that specifically does investigations and lessons learned on big breaches or big vulnerabilities and things like that is going to look into that one. So I don't know how long it's going to take them. In the case of Equifax, it took 18 months until we got that report from the House subcommittee that was put together to investigate it. In MGM's case, it could be 12 months, could be a year, could be 2 years. We don't know. But we're not going to talk about that because right now, all we have are all the details we have are from the attackers themselves, and they do tend to inflate the importance and significance of data they've stolen or things that they've done. So you have to take that. You always have to take that with a grain of salt. And yeah, since we're going to get a more accurate report, why speculate today? I don't think it does anybody any good.
For a lot of these, unfortunately, I think most people have a viewpoint that they're trying to push across, right? So either a vendor's legal team or marketing team for one of our stories. If it's the politicians, they're usually either trying to point fingers or get money. If it's the consumers, they're probably mounting to get ready for a lawsuit to sue people. So that's the nice thing about something like Defenders Initiative, when we can have like a third party actually sort of look at it from outside and go, okay, what's going on here? What do we see? What does the actual story say? Otherwise, it's hard for a lot of these. We want to try and, I think both of us want to try and get rid of that, the glean of the sexy something for the front page of the newspaper. So our blog, pick your Twitter, whatever have you. But how do we do that in a non-biased or minimal biased way? I think that's sort of the tough part.
Yeah, and it's I see a lot of security leaders in back channels, I mean, some folks are interested in just the latest, greatest information about something, but a lot are really turned off and almost disgusted, when vendors jump right on the latest breach and start talking about it, when it's oftentimes nothing but rumors or, something that we heard from the attackers themselves. If anything, that's just amplifying the attacker's ability to demand a ransom if it does happen to be an extortion case. So in a way, you're amplifying, you're doing free PR for them if you're doing that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I can see it from a vendor's point of view of like, if they don't have a really mature marketing or sales program, and right, they're maybe relatively they're not really well known yet. This is the vendor. And they're trying to get in front of customers. It's like, well, why should I talk to you? What you're one of like 500, data exfiltration vendors is going to, try and talk to me this week. They're like, oh, we're able to protect against X, right? So we see a lot of that for also like OWASP top 10. Sorry if I just made anyone cringe. But yeah, hey, there's something new out. Our software, we've shown that we could have protected against, again, I'll say move it. So I see where they're coming from, but the rest of us, yeah, I'm like you. Like if I walk down an aisle at RSA and I see that type of thing, I'm like, no, stop. So there's this really fine line for us, and I've been talking about this with some psychologists recently. There's a very fine line in our industry where we are paid to be very suspicious, right? So how do you market to someone like us? So it's you want to provide the facts, or it's say what you're doing, what you're talking about, what you're capable of. But at the same time, you can't go too far on that, because then suddenly you appear as rah-rah and you're selling, and that apparently is bad. And even from me, and it's a little tough. Can be.
Yeah.
But anyways.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into it. So we're going to go from October 2022 to current. And so the first one we're going to talk about is Drizly. And depending on where you live in the U.S., you may have had this alcohol delivery service available to you. May have heard of them, may not. I think they got bought by Uber for a little over $1 billion. So a unicorn got scooped up a couple years back, and their breach actually was in early 2020, just before the pandemic. But the reason it's on this list is we didn't know the full outcome of what came out of that breach, the punishment and all that, all the fallout until October 2022. And it was significant, which is why we're talking about it. Mm. So to run back through the breach here, it starts out with, innocently enough, a hackathon and an executive participating in a hackathon. So Drizly has a one-day hackathon, and everybody needs access to GitHub for that. So one of the executives is given access to GitHub for this one-day hackathon. The problem is they never take away the access, right? And we see this all too common with this is just general governance and account hygiene, just making sure permissions are taken away when they're no longer needed, right? Which is we're seeing more and more where administrators don't permanently have high-level privileges, right? Like they check them out. I've seen people refer to this as like a vending machine. where you get just-in-time access that you need to do the work that you need to do, because that access is so elevated. You can do a lot of damage if you have it all the time and somebody takes over to your account. Is that accurate, that description, John?
I think so. One of the ways I was thinking about this, though, is if you don't need minimum privileges, if you don't need to have access to something, pull it after that's over. But I think another way you could look at this one is, okay, hackathon's good, hackathon's awesome. For our listeners, you want your teams to do these. It gives them a chance to sort of build culture, learn, work on interesting parts of the application of your corporation. But does that mean you have to do it in your production code base? Maybe clone that into a new repo that's, this is just for the hackathon. We'll go delete it in a week. And you're not giving these, an executive or whoever else in your company access to the production code. I mean, the code itself might not be in production, but still that repo is, yeah. So there's different ways to sort of think about it. Like, what's the easiest way? What's the cleanest way? I think is probably the big takeaway here is like, okay, I like this one because this, they had good intentions, I think. But
yeah, and that's the case here. Is this is just bad habits, right? And I didn't consider what you're talking about, which I think is probably the most obvious thing. Is just start up a throw account just for this hackathon. Do the hackathon and kill that whole repo or kill that whole GitHub account that you're using for that. So that's many ways something like this could have been avoided, but yeah, the account he had a lot more access than just the hackathon files and just the hackathon repo. So fast forwarding a bit, he actually moved to a subsidiary of Drizly. So I get the impression from the report that his account was no longer active, at least his main, whether they were using Google Workspace or Office 365, I don't know. But
obviously he wasn't doing very well with hackathon.
Yeah. And so his account had like a 7-character password. It was one of those where he'd used it a bunch of other places, so it had been exposed in other breaches. So having a connection to have I been pwned or something like that, like at the corporate level could have helped here. So they got hit with basic cred stuffing like 2 years after this happened. This account wasn't SSO enabled, so even if you killed the password at that level because he was given a native GitHub account, that account was still dangling out there, was still active and very unprotected. No MFA, bad password, reused password. We know what that adds up to, and that's cred stuffing and ownage. And that's exactly what happened here. Attackers managed to get into the GitHub. More lessons to learn here. They found a bunch of access keys and sensitive credentials in the GitHub, used those to get into AWS, got database creds, dumped the customer database, had all the customer information, something like 2.5 million people, if I recall. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so that was the breach. And so the fallout for this breach is that, it got investigated, FTC got involved. And the FTC's lawsuit personally called out and sanctioned James Rellis, the CEO of Drizly. And the consent decree binds both the company and him personally to put more focus on security for the next 20 years. So anywhere James goes, if he's an executive at a company, if he has any control over the security program as a leader of a company or as an executive, he's got to do extra stuff. Doesn't matter where basically the rest of his career, right? He now has this sanction hanging over his head.
And it's weird, right? Because you have to ask. So this whole, part of me really likes the idea of having, some sort of level of legal ramifications for somebody in a company. The question is, who is that person, right? You don't want to have it. It's not going to be the the GitHub admin. Is it the CEO? Is it that executive? Is it who do you? I don't say whose hand do you slap, but like whose hand do you slap? And sort of a quick aside on this one. I got to Cloud Security Alliance had their conference up here in Seattle a week or two ago, September. One of the guest speakers was Joe Sullivan from Uber, and it was unrecorded.
Yep.
He didn't want it to have recorded, but it was interesting to hear him on that type of an unrecorded talk through what he went through with the whole Uber thing. And, it's a lot of. So I see both sides of this. There has to be some way to sort of say, if you guys are going to, I don't say screw up, if you're going to have gross negligence, I'll put it that way. How do you sort of? I think there's something there, but it's. I'm still not convinced on where we put people into trouble like this.
Yeah, and I think this makes sense, right? Because something I've learned from experience. I've had a lot of people tell me, I'm having such a hard time pushing security at work. Nobody cares, and the only advice I can give them is just go somewhere where they do care. Because if it's not cared about at a very high level, and if that doesn't trickle down, then forget about it. It's not a battle that you can win. It's not you can die on that hill, but it's not going to change anything if the priorities aren't set there. So I think it's kind of appropriate for this to affect. I don't know if Drizly had a CISO, but I think it is appropriate for it to go all the way up to the CEO, because one of the problems they found there, it wasn't just all these security controls were missing. Account management, storing credentials where they shouldn't have stored it. Just bad hygiene and management overall. But also they were storing too much information about customers. They're gathering information that they really didn't need to be keeping and holding about customers. So that was there was a privacy issue in here as well, and that's part of what the sanctions against both the company and the CEO are specifically call out, is only collect the information that's absolutely necessary for you to serve the customer.
I'm going to bring up the sanction side again for a second, but I think there's actually value in this conversation, because part of, obviously from an enterprise security point of view, we talk about not just these breaches. We're not here to talk about the glamour, but why do we as executives or as security leaders or pick your hat engineering leaders have to care about this? It's not just because we want to do the right thing, is we want to not be in jail or get fined or whatever else. But here's a question for you. Excuse me. I know we've both been doing some job hopping over the last few years. We've submitted job applications to some of these websites, and I'm sure we've both clicked those little boxes which said, I don't know, what's an example? I haven't been convicted of a felony in the last whatever, or I haven't. What's the SEC one? I haven't been sanctioned by the SEC for blah 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 blah. So now, as a CISO or something like that, would it either for that checkbox, or if they put another checkbox in the future, have you ever been sanctioned for cyber crimes, or your company has been sanctioned for cyber crimes?
Ooh, wow!
That would give people something to think about.
Yeah, I mean that's something I've noticed in the last couple of years. All the security leaders I know, certainly all the CISOs, have to go out and get personal liability insurance, just for themselves, just to be CISO, because that there is now a precedent for leaders of companies and security leaders to be personally impacted. Joe Sullivan was that's the reason his case was so big, is it was he was personally hit with criminal. And
he was talking about, part of what he was talking about in that conversation was, or that talk was, having to get a legal team, having to get a PR team to actually push back against some of the claims the FBI was making. I think I can say that without a NDA break, but it's a lot, right? So he's actually now apparently going out to other CISOs and sort of telling them these are the type of things you need to do. That suddenly makes your job a lot more than just, running security and trying to do things right. That's I would pass.
Yeah, yeah, and that was actually I saw somebody do a survey on that the other day, and it was interesting. It was basically, is it even worth being a CISO today? Or most CISOs looking to get out of that kind of business just because it's, the job's a lot, the risks, the personal liability and risks are a lot. Like it's the compensation is there, but past a certain point, I'm not sure that compensation is going to be worth the 10, 20 years it takes off your life in terms of stress and heartburn and ulcers. All right, let's move on. I also have, I'm not sure if we're going to have time to get through all of these. I might skip a few that are less interesting, but RackSpace I think is a pretty quick one because there's not a whole lot of details to go through here. Basically, so RackSpace, most companies I feel like have moved to Microsoft 365 these days. There's still some companies out there running their own Exchange infrastructure. It's been a painful 2 years for them because there's been some very big vulnerabilities. And one of those vulnerabilities, RackSpace got hit with because they were running an Exchange hosting service. And it was a small part of their business. I think it was, they said it was like 1% of the revenue or something like that. But still, this was over 10,000 customers, I believe. And a lot of them were like small municipal governments, city governments, county governments. Stuff, companies like that, they don't have a whole lot of IT budget. They don't change things often. They're not doing a whole lot of tech refresh. Okay. So they're still using hosted Exchange, and they got hit by ransomware through one of these vulnerabilities because they were too slow to patch. I think it was, they got hit like a month after the patch was released. I don't know why it took them so long it seemed like they.
Yes, you do.
Put more faith in a mitigation. There was a mitigation out that was just completely worthless. So maybe they put too much faith in that mitigation, but it did not stop the attack. And yeah, attackers tried to ransom it, started encrypting stuff, and instead of recovering, RackSpace just moved everybody over to Microsoft 365, and I'm sure it was very painful for those customers.
Yeah. What's tough is that this, and it depends on what other stories we talk about. There's a few areas where folks will come up to us. I get it probably once to twice a month of like, what password manager should I use? What email system should I be using? Which cloud? All those sort of standard big service type questions. I really don't like people running their own mail servers. I'm not sure how many ESW customers do that or listeners do that. Probably not too many, but on ESW, we get a few more to the nerds who like running that stuff in the garage at home. And I'm like, no, go do it on Google or Microsoft. And that's my point is if I tell them to go do it on one of those systems, how long? I mean, everyone's going towards whatever they're calling it this week, M365, O365.
M365. There's no more.
We're only covering 2 of their breaches in our list here. How long until, that system that we're telling people to go use their mail server that gets popped, and then we have how big is the problem? So it's the curse of the cloud to call that a cloud service. I know they do. Of like I really want people to use centralized managed services like this because running mail at home it's a pain in the butt. EXIM got compromised in the last week or two, so it's if you do it, you can do it, but keep it a hobby. It's super tough. So, but for those medium-sized companies that go to trust someone like this, I don't know, it's tough. I always really liked RackSpace. They do really great customer service, as this write-up sort of talks through. But at the same time, it's you got to stay on top of all that type of stuff. Any little glitch at all, not great.
Yeah, and related to that, number 9 in the news, which we'll cover later, is an actual discussion of if you're trying to choose between Google and Microsoft, they actually have an answer for you. And spoiler, they tell you you're less likely to get hacked if you use Google. And I think a lot of that has to do with I don't know what it is with Microsoft, but I've noticed on my Microsoft 365 accounts, just more scams make it through to my inbox. They don't get caught. And I have to turn off the junk filters because, in my experience, 100% of what they catch in the junk filters is not junk. And it misses all the junk. So I don't know what's going on there, Microsoft, but Google's got you beat in this case. And it sounds like somebody actually has some data on that. It comes from 2 separate insurance companies. They have data based on what they pay out is half as likely with Google than it is with Microsoft.
Wow, interesting.
Yep. So we have some actual insurance data on that now. All right, moving on to the next one, CircleCI. So this was one in a series. So we also have Lastpass here. We might as well talk about them as well. I want to say there was one more. I forget what it was, but we've had, so Uber, which is over a year ago, I think it was 13 months ago, we've had a bunch of cases of engineers getting malware on their laptops. And then this info stealer malware, an entire class of malware exists just to scoop up all your OAuth keys, all your access keys. It'll just grab all your cookies. So any logged in sessions you have, or anything that look like credentials or access keys, info stealer malware is just going to scoop up, send back to the attacker. Maybe sell it on some kind of black market website. And people can just go buy access to organizations using sessions that are already logged in. And CircleCI was one of those, and it came in via Mac OS malware of all things. So it was kind of a unique case. We don't hear a lot about breaches where Mac OS malware was involved. We know it's out there, but it almost seems more academic. Like we know it exists. But we don't often see it as kind of like a key step in a major attack.
Yeah, it's. I meant to do this beforehand, and I'm just doing it now. But I'm just recounting through the ones you have listed in here, and it looks like right around 50% of these breaches started due to either an employee laptop or something employee related. So. I know one of the takeaways you want to talk about, or I think you want to talk about, was, which enterprise tool stops this, or which security tool period stops this, right? It really comes back to, like I started saying offhand, of like the breaches which we're not talking about is because like a city org needs to have either more funding or better education. Maybe it's not just them.
Well, I think one of the trends here is detection and response is still really hard, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we have a single breach here where the company detected the breach themselves. Like either they found out because the attacker wanted them to find out, which is the case with extortion attacks because they want to get paid, right? And the other case is the customer telling them. We're going to talk about the Microsoft Storm, what was it, 0558 incident. It was the customers that told Microsoft, that this compromise had happened. And so a lot of this stuff is kind of hard to detect. Like in each of these cases, you can read through the details, and there are totally ways that you can detect it. Like MFA bombing should be very easy to detect, which is what happened in that Uber case, where you just send enough MFA like push requests until somebody relents and says okay, and lets the attacker log in. And but yeah, we're just still not doing a great job with detection and response. And I think a lot of it has to do with false positives. There's this idea in security that this kind of FOMO effect where you don't want to let go of any events or logs in case it could be important one day. And you end up with so much to review, so many alerts all the time that you don't really get through any of it. And you can't functionally detect any kind of attack.
I'm going to blow up your Discord/contacts, inbound contact complaints from your listeners here by saying that I think security data lakes are an absolute waste of time for 90-95% of the people who have them. I think the only people who really benefit are the storage vendors who are making money off that data, which is never going to be looked at. And it's because of this, right? We keep talking about the promise of AI and we're going to find all this stuff and okay, cool, great. And we're getting better, but again, one of the stories, they weren't saving the data long enough. But some of these are probably they had the data and they weren't looking in the right place, or they were understaffed, or I just think those data security, great marketing thing, but I think it's just a database of unused data.
All right, moving on, and I agree with you, right? Like it's that is that FOMO effect. Like I still have a huge CD collection. I haven't seen it in 3 years because it's in a storage unit, but it makes me feel really good knowing that it's there, right?
Yeah. Like, and I'm the same way, right?
your
as a security person, I want every single little bit of data you can possibly get me, like everything in this room. If I could get logs off it, I'd want it. But then what the hell am I going to do with it? It just sits somewhere. It's like,
yeah. It's got to be actionable.
From an AppSec point of view, that goes back to our developers of like, log something in a clear way that we know that that's actually not a debug statement or something we can do with, not just, make the logs usable and actionable. And that really helps out a lot too.
Yeah. All right. So Riot Games, the only reason I put them on here is they promised to release a report, but they haven't. So at least not that I've found. So maybe they released it somewhere. I went through their Twitter account, went through their website, couldn't find where they released it, but they said they were going to talk about the attacker TTPs and they were going to be really transparent with it. Every couple of months I go back and I check because I study all this stuff and I have databases of all the lessons learned and details from big breaches. And I believe that was a ransomware case. And but I haven't seen anything yet. So I'm going to keep pestering them until I see something.
It's only been 10 months, Adrian. They're working on the formatting. They'll get it to you.
They're working on the formatting. They're trying to get it through legal is what's happening, right?
Yes.
Yeah, somewhere somebody's screaming, the report's been done for 7 months. They won't let me share it. Next one here is CommutAir, which is like a small regional airline, I believe, that I had never heard of before this happened. And this is another one of those cases. The attacker released everything. And it's unclear if they're even really an attacker. It seems like a researcher that just, didn't care about releasing the stuff to the public and just kind of went full disclosure on it. But, still kind of an interesting case because there's lots of lessons to learn from if you go through the details of it. I'm going to put this, the link in the, actually, I need to put up some links for all of these in the show notes. So I'll go back and do that. But I'm also dropping links into the Discord here. And the web page is a lot, just warning you before you go there. The background is bright pink. There's animated stuff flying around the screen. It has strong GeoCities vibes. So yeah, nothing specific there. I mean, this is very much kind of the classic case of, just open Jenkins servers and S3 buckets and stuff that you can find on Shodan, just all over the place. Just one of those classic cases where, you need to really map out your external attack surface and get control of it.
But, the first step when he has on there, just sort of the talk to folks. One of the big questions I've gotten most of my career, if I'm consulting or even full time, is like, why would people want to attack us? Right? We're like X little small company, and nowadays the reasons have changed over the years. Extortion, crypto, what have you. But step number one here is still, I think, one of the numero unos. It's like someone's bored, they're like, well, let's see what we can do at the airline, and that boredom goes a long way, gets us in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, right. Like the attack against Uber, that was Lapsus, where they basically got into their enterprise password manager and had access to everything. The case where EA got hit, where we saw a Grand Theft Auto 6 details and stuff released. All that was just teenagers with time and just wanting to see what they can get into, wanting to see what they can find. And even before ransomware, back when I was a pen tester, we did incident response at the firm that I worked at, and a big chunk of our cases were just people's money being stolen directly out of their bank account. So people would say, well, we don't have any PII, we don't have any like payment data, like why would somebody hack us? My response to that would always be, do you have money in the bank? Does your company have a bank account? That's enough. They'll go after that.
Yeah.
So
but I mentioned it sort of not a valid excuse. I just mentioned it to our listeners. Like it's obviously we saw a stat this week on ESW. Amazon has a new honeypot. Well, it's new to me, honeypot out there that from the moment they instantiate one of the instances for it, they start getting scanned within 90 seconds, and the machine starts getting attacked within 3 minutes. So, I mean, that number a few years ago is what, 10, 15 minutes? If you had a Windows machine on the internet. The point here being like, you can't think like, oh, I don't have PII or I don't have one of these type of things. No, someone's going to go after you just because like they're bored and, you know, they finished the last level of their game.
Yeah. All right, moving on to the Microsoft ones here. So I already mentioned Storm 0558. The thing that kind of bugs me there is either they don't know or they haven't shared how the attacker actually got in. So we don't know what the initial point of compromise is, except that they've mentioned it was an engineer. So again, we've got this pattern of engineers' personal systems or their personal credentials getting hit, whether it's like a SaaS OAuth key or their actual laptop getting malware on it. You know, that seems to be the entry point. Maybe it's similar to one of the other ones we've seen with LastPass and CircleCI and Uber, where it's one of these info stealer malwares that poses as another application. Like somebody was just trying to download OBS in one of these cases, you know, which is anybody who streams or anything like that is familiar with OBS, just software that allows you to do screen overlays and things with your video feed. And yeah, that was a thing for a while where Google, if you Googled OBS, the first download options you would see were sponsored downloads that led to malware. And the attackers were actually paying Google AdWords to put malware up there and to sponsor malware. So yeah, that was a problem for a little bit. So we don't know how they got in, but we do know they got into that. It seemed easier for them to attack Microsoft directly to get access to 25 organizations than to try and hack those 25 organizations. We know these were professionals. We know it was China. Or at least all the reports trace it back to China as the attacker in this case. And yeah, it took 32 days for customers to notice and let Microsoft know. So again, detection is difficult here, it seems.
Yeah, I'm sure I know an ASW to not be a big fan of Microsoft, unfortunately. They've got amazing engineers and amazing security people, but somehow stuff like this keeps happening.
It does.
You know, I think in this case, I'll say what I said on there. I think in this case, this wasn't as bad as it seemed. This wasn't an easy. I mean, they got access to a lot of accounts through what they were doing, but at least from what I've seen. What I know so far is there was a binary which had been running in production, had access to production crypto keys in it somehow, encryption keys. That somehow core dumped it. That ended up in a special system that engineers could go and grab a copy of the core dump so they could do some troubleshooting to see why it crashed. Core dump, I'm using the phrase generically. So the dude brought it back to his local system. And at that point, again, we have the hand waving. We're not quite sure how, but the attackers managed to get access to that, get that binary, start digging through it, and somehow realized, oh, there's a key in here. We can make use of that. So that's not a quick afternoon work, right? That's a bit of pretty good. Kudos to them for pulling that off. But at the same time, the detection, 32 days for a key which was being used in a way which it was a signing key being used for authentication, if I remember right.
Yeah.
Come on. So, yeah. Anyways, yeah. It's interesting. I think this was. I mean, these were. It shows you. We just went from talking about bored teenagers. This is the exact opposite situation of that, which I think it's good to show the balance between the two. But I'd rather not see it.
Yeah. I mean, the hacking Microsoft versus CommutAir, not the same skill level required to pull that off. This deserves the label of complex and sophisticated attack, right? Like there are a lot of steps here. Microsoft did share a lot of lessons learned, but it was mostly lessons learned for them, and that was one of the things I was disappointed about here is they didn't really share any useful lessons learned for the rest of us, right? Like these were Microsoft employees using Microsoft systems. Somehow they got compromised, and Microsoft didn't tell us how. So we could all, like, if Microsoft can't defend its own employees, like, what chance do we have? And they didn't give us any tips on or lessons learned on that. So
there's a segue for you.
if you
Speaking
manage
of Microsoft employees.
Yeah, speaking of Microsoft employees, sharing external data. Like this is another one of those cases. You made a really good suggestion, John, earlier of, hey, when you're going to do a hackathon, why not just spin up dedicated space just for that on GitHub instead of using, like stuff that's connected to production? And that's kind of the issue here. So the Microsoft AI research team wanted to share some ML models on GitHub, and the way that they shared it, some kind of Amazon S3 bucket equivalent. I don't really understand the service that they shared it from, but typically, like if I share part of my Google Drive with you, I just shared Notion with you today. Like it's very specific. Like I've told Notion, look, I'm going to share this one page. Like you don't have access to my whole Defenders Initiative subset of data. I don't think. I think you only have what I specifically shared. In this case, the attackers were able to take this key that shared the data, which the key was just embedded in the URL. You could just plug in the URL and basically go up a few directories, the equivalent of just exploring the rest of that data, because apparently that key gave access to the whole bucket of information, not just the specific folder that they were trying to share or data that they were trying to share. And in there, again, we see, you're talking about somebody's personal core dump ending up in places it shouldn't be. Again, in this case, personal PC backups are mixed in there with AI research data. Why? And they're not encrypted. So most of the damage done here, well, it wasn't really damage done. This was Wix researchers that found it, another security vendor that reported it. And, so it was all responsibly reported and everything. There wasn't any actual breach here, which is why I call it a data leak, not a breach. But yeah, it's just, again, hygiene. Like, why are your unencrypted backups sitting in the same directory as all the AI research data? And of course, those backups had keys. They had all kinds of other stuff floating around in there, which like thousands, tens of thousands of Teams messages. Yeah, it was a mess.
Personally, I was a fan of the. There was some screenshots of like, "Hey, bro, what's going on? How are you?" So again, for the opposite of me, someone I'm not a fan of, who I am a really big fan of for the last year or two, is both Orca and Wix. Wiz. Their write-ups and the amount of work that those guys have been doing on the cloud providers, not just Microsoft, a lot of Microsoft, some Google and some Amazon too. They've got some sharp folks that are doing some really great write-ups with what they're finding and helping secure all of us. So while the providers aren't doing it, these guys are. So I would go and browse through that. I think this was a little more of an oops, right? But still, when you're operating at this scale, when you claim to be spending $2 billion a year on security, you shouldn't be having oops. And again, I get it's the AI arm, not the engineering arm, not someone else. They probably had a little more freedom in what they were able to get away with. But yeah.
Yeah, and try to remember, who's the largest security vendor in the industry? Who is it? Does like $20 billion in security revenue? It's Microsoft. That's right. All right. And with that, with that snarky remark that will probably come back to haunt me later. Anything else you want to share before we wrap up here, John?
No, I'm good. I think, if like I said, the last call, I think I broke up for a second. Apologies. The Wiz and Orca stuff is awesome. I think you let off with a great question at the beginning, Adrian. It's like, do I do, for those of us who are podcasters, industry sort of media types, do we follow this stuff closely? Should our listeners be looking at each one of these? I would say, like, think about, what could affect you or your business, or how can you learn? Can you find an area like this? Are you using Azure? Okay, maybe focus on the Azure ones. Are you using mail servers? Like, what sort of area, sort of have some level, use this as a form of threat intel. What are people are attacking? What breaches are out there? What have happened? But I think also it came back to what you're saying. You can't look at something from 18 months ago that's not actionable anymore. So can you find something that happened in the last 2 or 3 months? And I don't expect you all to go be looking on the Discord servers on the hacker channels of like what they're bragging about. But
Right.
what's the happy medium in between of how you can sort of keep yourself aware of these things?
Yep. So personally, I use databreaches.net. It's going to be very noisy though. Like most of them aren't going to have details that you can learn from. But every morning I do kind of scan through there and look for anything that seems notable. They do a great job of covering like breadth of stuff. But mostly it's like a short write-up and a link to something else that talks about the breach. So it's very wide, not very deep. So it's kind of a lot to try and scan every day. They often post about a dozen items per day. That's how active breaches are these days. But yeah, until there's something better. Yeah, that's what I do. All right. Thank you so much, John, for joining me on short notice today. I appreciated it. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk about the weekly news with Tyler Shields.